Hi guys, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Winter's Day raid, the secret lair of the Snowmen. It is a 10-player instance themed around festive fun. I really think it slipped under the radar and is not only unappreciated, but also has some extra significance with regards to PvE content in the game as a whole. What interests me is how much of a mini-raid the Lair really is. It has a custom environment, collectibles on the map, a pre-event, dialogue, and a boss complete within Rage Timer. And while it's perhaps not as grand as some normal raids, mostly comprised of reused assets, that doesn't detract from the content itself. Freezy actually has more mechanics than many raid bosses. For example, Cairn has 9 mechanics, while Freezy has 10. And you'll be surprised how well Freezy stacks up in terms of complexity even to some of the harder bosses. In fact, the only difference is the loot is of course lesser, and so is the difficulty. What I'm trying to say here is that it really wouldn't be that hard to make it a fight worthy of raids. I realise having a raid for a festival would be contentious, but it really shouldn't be. I think everybody's interest can be satisfied with difficulty settings and perhaps loot scaling. Now, easy mode is not something we have in the game right now, or is it? In the recent story update, before fighting a boss, the player is offered food, weapons and armor, and taking them will greatly reduce the difficulty of the upcoming encounter, and in some places in the story, you just can't die. Well, that certainly sounds like an easy mode to me, and the interesting thing about that is that we end up with 3 difficulties as a result of this: easy, normal, and challenge mode. I think 3 is a really good place to be because the current difficulty of Freezy was too difficult for some players who really didn't want the bother of finding 10 players. So simply make the easy mode unfailable and soloable with overpowered buffs and immortality. Normal mode can act almost as a bridge into conventional raiding with a few tweaks, and CM should be made into a full-fledged boss. Bear in mind you get an achievement for using none of the assistants in the story, so the game can track if easy mode is enabled, presumably allowing for a separation of rewards by difficulty. But why would ArenaNet ever do something like this? Well, it's quite simple. The mere presence of 10-man content is enough to aggravate some players, and Freezy is no exception, but that is an absolute tragedy. Where Guild Wars 2 truly shines is in areas where its superior combat system is allowed to shine, raids being a perfect example of this. And I do believe that raids are for everyone, or at least they can be. Perhaps a few standalone bosses with difficulty settings can make challenging group content seem a little bit less intimidating. And I'm not saying all raids should have these settings, but a large portion of the community does feel alienated from, or just doesn't feel up to raiding. If we look at Guild Wars 2 efficiency statistics, if you have even 1 legendary divination, you have more than the top 10% of players, skewed in favour of raids, of course. In other words, around 10% of players engage with the most recent endgame PvE in the game, and wings 1 to 4 don't fare much better, with a handful of insights placing players in the top 20%. What I'm trying to point out here is that 10-man content does not currently appeal to a large portion of the community, and that by using multiple difficulty settings, not only can this be fixed, but the more jaded salty veterans can be pleased as well. And I think a great medium to do this will be 1 or 2 standalone bosses at a time without super fancy environments or models, purely mechanics and reward focused alongside regular raids. In fact, it might be better to reverse that, or at least mix it up. Having some heavy lore packaged into more accessible raids would certainly make sense. In my opinion, it would be okay to have some of the pure challenge or fun fights in a vacuum, just big bosses with big abilities for fun. Why not have a massive rampaging Chak boss or a fearsome forged monstrosity? These enemies are already in the game, and are in a way left largely unused except as forgettable open world drones. Not every boss needs to be a masterpiece of design or animation. Just look at the humanoid bosses like Sabbather, Desmina, Matthias or Veil Guardian, who is a glowing humanoid that punches and backhands you to death. An interesting thing about the Secret Lair is that its development seems to have been largely led by an intern the raid team had over the summer.
This last summer, the raids team actually had a summer intern with them and decided to put him on designing and creating the original version of this Secret Lair of the Snowmen. That was Jacob Taylor, who did an incredible job on all of this. After he finished his internship, our team came in and cleaned it up, but a lot of what you see here is his cool ideas and the raid team's support with making this cool boss for us to add as a holiday activity.
For a start, that's one hell of an intern, but this could indicate that single bosses with less story connections might not be as painful to develop as full lore-based raid wings, especially when these introduce massive environments, countless lines of dialogue, skins, and music. I don't think it will be an exaggeration to say that the raid wings are probably the most ambitious maps and encounters in the entire game. I'd love to see more raids in the game, and if subtracting some of these pressures, particularly around unique rewards, which could be replaced with generic ascended chests from fractals and the magnetite vendor, would assist with that end, then I think it will be good not only for the veteran elitist players, but also for the players who currently feel they are not included. To me, Freezy demonstrates that it is possible to make a raid for everyone, and the existence of challenge modes and eating food in the story shows that we can get difficulty settings, so everyone can be satisfied and rewarded. I guess it's time to break out the interns. The only remaining question is, why am I even talking about this? And the answer is unsurprising. I really like raids, and I would like more of them. And I believe that the best way to get more raids is to raise player participation and unite the veterans and casuals alike under one banner. The literal embodiment of sadness is what I find myself becoming when I see players who want to raid but perceive them to be too much effort, or think it's only for super elitist players and therefore stay away. I do my best to help anyone who is looking for assistance, but to truly solve the plight of raids, I think that some compromises have to be made by the community and by ArenaNet.